We welcome you to the session on the pre-serve conference session on what to do when patients complain of essentially dealing with retinal topics, which commonly a general ophthalmologist encounters in their practice. We have an eminent group of chairpersons and eminent faculty here to discuss common problems faced by patients in your clinic. We have Professor Sanjeev Mittal, who's a professor and head of Department of Ophthalmology at AIIMS, Rishikesh. We have Dr. Alok Sen, who's a medical superintendent and HOD VR and UVA at the Sadguru Netra Chikitsalaya at Chitrakoot. And we have Dr. Sarita Berry, who's the director, professor and HOD, Department of Ophthalmology, Lady Hardinge Medical College, New Delhi. So without wasting further time, I'm going to hand this over to our chairpersons. Professor Mittal, if you can start the sessions rolling.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, actually, I have not received the detailed program with me.
Yeah, the first talk. Okay. Okay. Dr. Alok, you have that list of talks with you?
Yes.
Can I ask you to introduce the first speaker?
So good morning all. And with great pleasure, I introduce Dr. Mahesh, who is a senior faculty at Girdhar Eye Institute. And I know him as a very jolly person, and he will be starting the day with a small quiz. Dr. Mahesh, can you please share your screen?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Alok. This is a very important topic for general ophthalmologists, comprehensive ophthalmologists. So I will start with some trivia questions on flashes, floaters. The esteemed faculty will be talking on flashes, floaters, micropsia, scotoma, etc. So let us start with a small quiz. These are all commonest symptoms in retina practice. The patient can come with all these symptoms. So my slideshow, I am just putting the slideshow. Yeah. Now my first question is, what is Moore's lightning streaks? This Moore was Robert Foster Moore was a British ophthalmologist. So if you have heard about what is Moore's lightning streaks, the question A, I will just, you can write in a piece of paper if you want to assess yourself. I will tell the answers at the end. A, photopsia seen in total blindness. B, choroidal infarct in lightning injury to macula. C, photopsia due to sudden movement of eye or head in the dark. D, none of the above. So what is Moore's lightning streaks? I am quite good in making confusing choices. So it is simple question. I will tell you the answer at the end. Okay, we'll go to the second question. What is myodysopsia? All this has some relevance to today's topic. That is why I am putting all these things. Question option A, visual hallucination in myasthenia gravis. Option B, colored floaters seen in Alzheimer's disease. Option C, glare due to Christmas tree cataract in myotonic dystrophy. And option D, perception of problematic or annoying floater. So these are the four options. We will go to question number 3. Phosphene is the phenomenon of seeing light without light actually entering the eye. In which condition do you get phosphene on movement of eye or sound? Option A, optic neuritis. This is a characteristic finding in one of these conditions. Optic neuritis, total blindness, drug abuse, and malingering. Phosphene on movement of eye, sudden movement or head sound. And with that, I will explain what is pressure phosphene also at the end. Which drug is known to cause macropsia? We know a lot of diseases cause micropsia, like CSCR and all. Which drug causes macropsia? Solpidem, Rabipiravir, it's a new drug, now we hear a lot. Systemic steroids and spironolactone. Which of the following is true about Alice in Wonderland syndrome or Todd syndrome? All are true except there is a distortion of perception like macropsia, micropsia, telopsia, etc. And it is seen in migraine, it is seen in brain tumor, it is seen in viral infections like dengue encephalitis, which is wrong. 3 are correct. So, which of the following is not true? Another interesting thing about colorblind person can see properly using a special version of Adobe Photoshop. There are special monitors and smartphone software for colorblind people. Red-green colorblind cannot see 3D movies. X-chrome lens and color max lens can significantly enhance color perception, which is not true. Which ophthalmic examination test was developed 100 years back? Ishihara, Amsler, Maddox, Watzke, Allen. Simple, straightforward question. All are true about this Amsler chart except this is Amsler chart number 3. It is good for central and centrocecal scotoma. It is useful in nutritional amblyopia. It is not useful in HCQ toxicity. Question number 9. What is this? Aniseconia, metamorphopsia, just another type of Amsler chart, or is it a migraine aura? Now, last question. Which will have the poorest vision in the following? A, B, C, D. A is a membrane, B is a macular hole, C is a mactal, and D is a pigment epithelial detachment. So, the answer quite fast. Answers. In fact, Moore's lightning streak is photopsia due to sudden movement of eye or head. When you look suddenly, change your head, eye or head in the darkness. It is due to the mobile liquid vitreous. It just means liquid is, vitreous is liquid. So it is Moore's lightning streak. Many of our patients complain. Nighttime flashes are harmless. So myodysopsia is perception of problematic or annoying flutter. Some people complain, very apprehensive. So that is myodysopsia. Phosphine on movement or sound is seen characteristically in optic neuritis, nothing else. Pressure phosphine is something when you press your eye, you see some phosphine-like picture. So that is in pressure phosphine. Macropsia is caused by solpidem. It's a drug. Citalopram and solpidem are characteristic. Just very few seconds more. Macropsia. So Alice in Wonderland syndrome is seen in, you can get macropsia, micropsia, telopsia, everything. It is seen in migraine and brain tumors. And it is seen with the Epstein-Barr virus or IMN, not dengue encephalitis. So that is wrong. Which is not true. In fact, a red-green colorblind person cannot see 3D movies. In the older 3D movies, they cannot see because it used the red and green filter. But now with the new, so that is all. Which was developed 100 years back, it was Amsler grid. And this is type 3 Amsler grid, which is useful for HCQ toxicity, which causes paracentral scotoma. And this is just another type of Amsler grid, nothing else, not anisoconia or anything. And in this, probably you can see the full thickness macular hole, choice B, will have the worst membrane and mactal, and PD may have good vision. So just a refresher thing. We'll go back to the talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor, for this wonderful session. I now request the next speaker, Dr. Bhushan Khare, to unmute the mic, turn on the camera, and share your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, the talk allotted to me today is regarding flashes and floaters, and I have been told to tune in the talk for a general ophthalmologist. Thank you, scientific committee, for allowing me to be part of this program. The incidence of retinal detachment is 1 in 10,000 people over a year. It's a relatively rare phenomenon, and the symptoms the patient presents with is, although not specific for retinal detachment, and differentiation from other ophthalmic conditions is very difficult without a dilated fundus examination. The urgency of referral to an ophthalmologist is to exclude a retinal detachment, as well as identify and treat retinal tears, especially in patients with high risk of posterior vitreous detachment. So we should always remember that the patient has come to us with a warning symptom, and it may be very costly both for us as well as the patient to miss this warning symptom and miss the retinal pathology. To understand the pathophysiology of this symptom, we know that for the posterior segment, a healthy vitreous may correlate with a healthy eye. It functions very well to give an optically clear media with no light interference passing up to the retina. However, as the vitreous degenerates, there is a loss of transparency initially in focal areas because of a loss of balance between hyaluronic acid and the collagen fibers. The collagen fibrils get clumped together and the fluid gets separated. The focal disturbance caused because of this, because of the shadow falling onto the retina, may present in different forms. It may be minimal floaters, and the density of floaters changes as the opacity goes closer to the retinal surface. The closer it is, the darker and sharper it is. The shape of the floaters may also differ according to the pathology. As this process progresses, the vitreous gel collapses, and another anatomical change which occurs in the vitreous is the separation of the posterior hyaloid from the retinal surface. As it's mostly an age-related phenomena, patients who are over the age of 70 years, they present symptomatically with flashes and floaters, and PVD is noted in the majority of these patients. As the vitreous separates from the retina, the vitreous gets a bit mobile. It may tug onto the retinal surface. It may also bang on the retinal surface, causing flashes of light for the patient, which is very, very alarming. Now, although vitreous detachment is an age-related phenomena, we should understand that it comes very early on in myopic patients, especially the higher myopes. And with aggressive refractive surgery is being done, 10% incidence has been noted in post-LASIK patients, which is important to note. In addition to the age-related phenomena, it is also noted because of trauma, because of surgery, as well as because of inflammation. Important to note is in these symptomatic patients, 14% may be having a retinal break. In the majority though, the vitreous collapses anteriorly to form a body in the anterior vitreous. It remains attached at the vitreous base, straddling the ora serrata. It's when there are abnormal posterior extensions at the vitreous base that traction may be implied onto the retinal surface, causing tears at the posterior edge of the vitreous base. As the posterior hyaloid separates, it may also pull on to adhesions between the vitreous and the retina, some normal, some abnormal. And as it separates, sometimes there is liberation of either blood into the vitreous cavity, or if there is a retinal tear, the pigment epithelium gets exposed to the vitreous cavity, releasing pigment into the vitreous. It is very important to note on slit lamp examination, it's a very important sign called by the name of Schaffer's sign that this patient may likely have a retinal pathology. On good examination, you may see the Weiss's ring, which is exactly the size of the edge of the optic disc from where the glial tissue separates as the vitreous detaches. Some patients may present with vitreous hemorrhage. It's important to note that 70% may have a single or multiple break in these patients, and a majority of these may go on to progress to form a retinal detachment later. So it's very important to examine these patients. In our clinical examination, other clues may be indicative of something more alarming. We should remember that the pathology is usually in the peripheral retina, and so it's a must for either us to learn indirect ophthalmoscopy and do a dynamic depressed examination, gentle if there is presentation of hemorrhage, but this part of the examination is not to be overlooked. At this point of examination of a patient, I will emphasize on correct communication with a correct message to the patient. We should explain to the patient that posterior vitreous detachment is a process which goes on for almost 2 to 3 months. Although normal today, a tear may develop later and a repeat examination is mandatory. 3 to 4% of patients may develop a tear over this period. He also has to be warned, fresh floaters, fresh flashes, he should report early to you. So in the majority, the posterior vitreous detachment may culminate into just asymptomatic posterior vitreous detachments as the symptoms fade off, or there may be a lingering peripheral pathology which may be blinding for the patient. We should emphasize that such a patient needs an urgent dilated fundus examination, and if need be for the correlating pathology, a same-day referral to a retina practitioner to intervene early. I will emphasize for medico-legal reasons to note your findings as well as in short a small message what we have conveyed to a patient. Some patients, however, may present to us with a retinal detachment. We should emphasize to these patients as a general ophthalmologist that he needs early intervention. It is operable with very good success rates, and we can help the patient schedule an immediate appointment with a retinal surgeon. So to re-emphasize, in a majority, PVD is a normal process of aging, and you can neglect the symptoms if the patient has these symptoms mostly for a long time. Vision has been good and flashes have eventually stopped. But if it is alarming with new increased flashes and floaters, if there is a dark curtain or shadow moving across, if the patient has floaters after eye surgery or eye injury, it has to be looked into. Higher risk category of individuals with high myopes, post-cataract surgery, or history of retinal problems earlier need to be looked into. Again, to emphasize indirect ophthalmoscopy, good counseling, and to refer or treat these patients in time, very, very important. Posterior vitreous detachment needs to be followed up again after 2 or 3 months to emphasize and clear that there is no pathology present. A break, if in an attached retina, can be treated with retinopexy, or a definitive procedure may be done for a retinal detachment. Just to complete my talk, there may be other reasons for flashes of light for a patient, but this does not come under the purview of my talk, which is directed more so towards targeted patients of retinal detachment.
Dr. Bhushan, you'll have to
Thank
wind
you.
up. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor, for the wonderful session. I now request the next speaker, Dr. Sunil Ganikal, to unmute the mic, turn on the camera, and share the presentation. Thank you.
I'll just introduce Dr. Sunil Ganikal. He's the Medical Director, Devangiri Netralaya, Karnataka.
Dr. Sunil, you're there?
Yeah, just a minute.
Share your screen.
This is Dr. Sinha.
Yeah, just a minute, sir. I'm sharing my screen.
Go ahead. Sunil, go ahead. Sunil, go ahead. We'll take your time, no problem. I'll just share with the audience that what Dr. Khare said was absolutely, the last one point he made was note down your findings. Actually, in a PVD and flashes, there's no findings, there are no breaks, nothing to note down. But I suggest that you still write down on the file something over there, some documentation or format, and tell the patient that this flashes are going to continue for quite some time. And even if you are having a laser for lattice or whatever horseshoe tear, the floaters and flashes will not go away. Because patients have this habit of, I came with a problem, I got the treatment and my problem is not gone. So I think the necessity to emphasize on that is very, very important. So we have Sunil on. Sunil, start, please.
Please start, sir.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Today I will be speaking to regarding the what to do when you see a black patch in center of the eye. So the most common causes for the black patch in center of the eye, when somebody tends to have a fluid collection in the macular area, or hemorrhage due to some other cause, or when somebody develops a macular scar in the center of the area, or associated with macular detachment due to any etiology. Inflammatory posterior uveitic lesions sometimes can cause the patch. Sometimes, rarely, cortical lesions, especially occipital lobe lesions, can cause the central patch in the eye. The commonest causes for etiological things can be divided into either retinal or choroidal lesions, which involve the macula, the optic nerve disorders, and rarely the cortical lesions. As previously a speaker told about the vitreous floaters, I will not go into the details of this. Somebody sees a vitreous floaters, this is one of the commonest cause for the central patch in the center, the black patch in the center of the eye. Most often, it doesn't require any intervention. It just needs an observation. Rarely, you can try a YAG laser vitreolysis if it is an anterior vitreous. If the dense vit opacities are there, probably optical vitrectomy needs to be considered. So one of the commonest cause for the black patch in center of the eye is central serous chorioretinopathy. The black patch could be due to either the fluid accumulation or subretinal fibrin or RP alterations or the defects which develop secondary to CSR. All these patients in the acute stage probably doesn't require any intervention, just needs an observation. Sometimes in persistent fluid, one may have to do a focal laser or resort to a off-dose, off-fluence, PDT or photodynamic therapy in these patients. Another commonest cause for the central patch is the age-related macular degeneration, which could be either dry age-related macular degeneration or wet age-related macular degeneration. In dry age-related macular degeneration, it's mainly due to the formation of a geographical atrophy, pigmented clumps, and wet AMD, basically because of the hemorrhage and the retinal pigment epithelial detachment, the one tends to develop a central patch. In wet AMD, in dry AMD, most often we tend to treat them, either follow them for the progression of geographical atrophy and treat them with antioxidant medications. In wet AMD, we tend to treat them with anti-VEGFs or PDT in certain cases. In stages of scar, one need to just observe, not much intervention can be done. There are other causes which can cause choroidal neovascular membrane other than AMD, like myopia, angioid streaks, trauma. In these CNVM patients, one can treat them with anti-VEGF injections. Another commonest differential diagnosis for age-related macular degeneration is, which causes the hemorrhage in the macular area, is polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy and retinal artery macroaneurysms. Both these conditions can be treated with anti-VEGFs, and in polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, you can consider the option of PDT also, and you can do a laser to the retinal artery macroaneurysms, or in severe cases, one needs vitrectomy. Another group of conditions which can cause central patch in the eye is known as iridomacular degenerations. Most often these lesions are bilateral, asymmetric, and tend to have a macular involvement, like conditions like Stargardt's disease, retinitis pigmentosa, Best vitelliform dystrophy, gyrate atrophy, and many things. Most often these can be diagnosed with the use of macular diagnostic imaging techniques, as well as by doing an electrophysiological test. And most often the treatment depends upon the stage of the disease and needs genetic counseling in these patients. The other commonest macular lesion which causes the central patch is the macular hole. Invariably, full thickness macular hole requires a vitrectomy. The macular gliosis, severe gliosis in the center of the macula, can cause the scotoma. Solar retinopathy, if it is exposure to solar eclipse, can have a outer retinal changes and outer layer holes, and these can be treated with in our acute stages by steroids. Trauma is another important cause for the central patch. The trauma can present in various manifestations. The one scenario is choroidal rupture with subretinal heme. If it is sparing the fovea, you can just observe it. If it is a large submacular subretinal hemorrhage, one can resort to either pneumatic displacement or vitrectomy. Rarely, trauma can cause posterior pole macular infarction. In those cases, one needs steroids or thrombolytics. The systemic disorders like diabetes and hypertension can cause premacular hemorrhages or vein occlusions and arterial occlusions. These also causes the black patch in the center of the eye. The disorders like anemia, leukemia, thrombocytopenia, these are the systemic disorders which causes bilateral macular hemorrhages. These also needs to be, systemic disease has to be treated to control the eye problem itself. The other cause for the central patch is the pigmented scars in the macular lesions. If you see an eye myope patient with a pigmented patch in the center of the eye, it could be Foster-Fuchs spots. Sometimes a healed central choroiditis or a posterior uveitis can cause a scar, or mactal or a parafoveal telangiectasia can also have pigmented clumps. All these things can produce a central patch in the eye. Another commonest cause for the macular hemorrhage is the Valsalva maneuver, which causes a typically premacular hemorrhage. Either it could be subialum or subialoid hemorrhage. It can be treated with YAG iridotomy and sometimes may require a vitrectomy for removal. The posterior uveitis, especially when it involves the macula, can cause central patch. For example, the things like toxoplasma retinochoroidis, viral retinitis, serpiginous choroiditis, neuroretinitis involving the posterior pole, VKH causing the macular detachment, and inflammatory macular disorders like acute macular neuroretinopathy can cause central patch. These can be treated with immunosuppressive steroids, and based on the etiology, you have to treat these patients. The drugs are the systemic drugs are the another cause, important cause for the causing of central patch in the eye. It could be the drugs like hydroxychloroquine, tamoxifen, phenothiazines, oxalate. There are many drugs which on chronic medications can cause macular changes and bring about central patch. So one need to look into the cumulative dose of these drugs, discontinue the drugs if there is a toxicity, shift to an alternate drug, do investigations like multifocal ERG, central visual fields, and the routine tests like FFA, OCT. So we will be able to pick up these lesions and treat accordingly. Sometimes the posterior pole tumors itself can cause central patch, some things like choroidal metastasis if it is in the central area, circumscribed choroidal hemangioma in the posterior pole, choroidal osteoma, posterior pole melanoma. All these things can be cause patch, central patch in the eye, in the macular area. So one need to resort to chemotherapy and other modalities of treatment for these tumors. Optic nerve disorders like toxic nutritional optic neuropathy, hereditary infiltrative disorders, as well as optic with macular detachment can cause these lesions, and these has to be treated accordingly. The inflammatory lesions like optic neuritis also sometimes can cause the central patch. Last but not the least is sometimes the cortical lesions, especially occipital cortex lesions like infrax or compressive lesions in the occipital cortex can cause central patch. Suspect and cortical lesion when you don't see a fundus pathology and there is a vision loss or scotoma not attributing, then you can get an investigations like MRI brain or get a visual fields done and have a neurophysician's consultation to tackle this problem. So these are some of the common causes which can cause central patch in the eye, and the prognosis depends from case to case, and it has to be evaluated properly to come to a conclusion, and it can be treated effectively. Thank you for patient hearing. I would like to thank the AOS Scientific Committee for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for this insightful session. I now request the next speaker, Dr. Saurabh Kumar, to unmute the mic, turn on the camera, and share your presentation. Thank you.
Let me introduce Dr. Saurabh. Dr. Saurabh is a senior faculty at Shankar Nethralaya, Kolkata, and I have been a fan of his vitreoretinal videos, which I usually follow in every conferences. Dr. Saurabh, over to you.
Thank you, AIOSC and Dr. Sen and Dr. Shetty, Dr. Saurabh Sinha for giving me this opportunity. My talk is about distorted vision, and to tell first thing first, distorted vision and central patch are more or less similar looking symptoms, but they are different. When we are talking about distorted vision, we are talking that the vision is good, the patient is able to see well, but whatever he is seeing is distorted. So the objects are distorted, but the sentinel visual acuity is fine. So we have to make sure that what we are dealing with, is it really distorted vision or something else? So we'll have to ask leading questions, that are the straight lines which the patient is seeing are curved, or are the shapes, fixed shapes which are there are appearing irregular, a circle is appearing as something else. So this is actually what distorted vision should be. And there are similar symptoms which which patient can tell that he is having a distorted vision, and we have to make sure that we are dealing with the distorted vision symptoms, because the interpretation and the workup will be different for each thing. So if the patient says that he is seeing too hazy to see any straight line as a straight, or too dim to understand the shape of the object, then probably he is dealing with he is having a cataract. Similarly, very important symptom is missing letters while reading. Sometimes patients say that when they start reading a sentence from left to right, when they move to right, they are not able to see the letters which they just read, or they are missing part of a digit, like they are reading 8 as 3. This is exclusively seen in parafoveal telangiectasia, and it should be different. It should not be clubbed as distorted vision. It is very typical of parafoveal telangiectasia, which is a disease of the fovea, and has a lot of pigments. If we see on a 78 diopter lens, or even direct ophthalmoscopy, can show black pigments on around the fovea. So coming back to the distorted vision can be painless, which is the most common scenario, and it can be painful when the posterior when sometimes there is subretinal fluid along with posterior scleritis. Then patient may simply complain of distorted vision with 6/6 Snellen's acuity and some pain on eye movements. Similarly, if the patient is a young, then he probably has some central serous chororetinopathy or choroidal neovasculopathy, or if the patient is an elderly, he or she may have CNVM or IPCV as causing distorted vision. What are the other signs which we need to keep in mind while we are assessing a patient with distorted vision? If there are anterior chamber reactions, the patient may have subretinal fluid along with because of the VKH syndrome, and the anterior chamber reactions are not that obvious or common, but in this scenario, the patient may have anterior chamber reaction also. If a patient with distorted vision has RAPD, then probably we are dealing with neurosensory detachment at macula, papillomacular bundle, fovea, along with some optic nerve pathology. So associated symptoms will tell us which way we should think and which investigations we should order. So what are the investigations? Indirect ophthalmoscopy, OCT, FFA, ICG, and all OCTA. So yes, it is important to do an indirect ophthalmoscopy in a patient who complains of distorted vision, because if a macula on RD is just bisecting the fovea, patient will still have 6/6 vision, N6 vision, and he will just see distortion of objects. So 6/6 vision with macula on RD can have distorted vision. That's why indirect ophthalmoscopy and detailed examination of the periphery is very important. OCT, what should we look for in such a patient? We should look for subretinal fluid, we should look for CNVM, and we should also look for optic disc edema or optic disc pit maculopathy. When do we do fluorescein angiography? If we find subretinal fluid in a patient with distorted vision, we look for central serous chororetinopathy, choroidal neovasculopathy, pachychoroid neovasculopathy, IPCV, VKH, posterior scleritis, and optic disc pathologies can be looked at on FFA imaging in a patient of distorted vision. So we need to further, next step is to find if the patient has CNVM, then we have to identify which pathology is causing CNVM. If in elderly, it will be neovascular AMD. If the patient is myopic, then it can be myopic or idiopathic CNVM or retinal dystrophies. We can also be there. When do we advise ICGA in these patients? If the patient has distorted vision with central serous chororetinopathy and he is an elderly, he is beyond 50 years of age, then we know that CSC is uncommon in this age group, and we need to do an ICGA to rule out pachychoroid spectrum or to rule out IPCV. Similarly, if the patient is having recurrent and chronic central serous retinopathy not responding to treatment for over years, then we probably may like to do an ICGA to rule out other things. And whenever we are suspecting IPCV, then we have to rule out that by doing an ICGA. So such a patient, when we have reached up to a stage when we are suspecting IPCV, then when we need to know that in a patient with distorted vision, when we suspect CNVM and when we suspect an IPCV. So if a patient with distorted vision having something similar to something looking like a CNVM, and we still consider no, it may not be a CNVM, it may be some IPCV, then we need to look for these symptoms, these signs. These signs will be there will be few or no drusen at all at the macula. The hemorrhages will be out of proportion of the size of the CNV. The CNV is small, but the hemorrhages are huge and extensive. The hard exudates will also be again out of proportion of the size of the CNV, and there will be predominance of tall and peaked serous PEDs, which should tell us about thinking in the direction of IPCV. And obviously on OCTs there are many markers, but the most common which every ophthalmologist should be acquainted with is a double layer sign, which is hyper reflective, which it can lead us to think about IPCV. So this is how IPCV looks like clinically. As I said earlier, the left fundus photo shows that there is a large area of retinal elevation. There are plenty of hard exudates and retinal hemorrhages, but CNVA is not that obvious, and there is a small thing at the right of the fovea, but the hemorrhages and elevation is huge. The OCT shows here that there are undulating retinal pigment epithelium detachment along with hyperreflective deposits just beneath the RPE, which are suggestive of polyp. And ICG shows a large branching vascular network, which is straddling the fovea and extending to the temporal macula. So this is how we think when we find a patient with distortion of vision, and this is how we investigate. Obviously, the treatment will depend upon the cause and the actual cause of the disease, actual cause of the symptom, and ultimately we need to look for the small pointers in which direction we need to order. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Doctor, for the session. I now request the next speaker, Dr. Devesh Kumawat, to unmute the mic, turn on the camera, and share your presentation.
I think next is Deepti Kulkarni. I think Dr. Deepti.
We have Dr. Devesh Kumawat and then.
Oh no, other way around. No. Dr. Devesh is presenting case presentations. We'll be having Dr. Deepti first.
Sir, Dr. Deepti.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's. Thank you, Team AIOS, for this opportunity. I'll just be highlighting a few conditions where we see sudden dimness of vision, which can often classify as an ophthalmic emergency, and hence they need to be looked at quickly and managed even quicker. So when a patient presents to us with a sudden dimness of vision, the questions we need to ask him or her are, how did they notice it first? And is it transient or is it persisting? Also, we need to ascertain the presence or absence of pain so that we can classify what condition it is. Let's just highlight a few conditions that we see commonly in the clinic. Vascular occlusions are the commonest causes of sudden dimness of vision. First, the veins. They can either be a central or branch vein occlusion. Patients who are observant might even give us a history of having had a similar episode 1 or 2 days prior to this actual episode. And they can have a history of hyperlipidemia, diabetes, hypertension, and other lifestyle disorders. We all know a vein occlusion presents with the venous dilatation in the fundus, hemorrhages, edema, and vascular stasis. The treatment, of course, is with anti-VEGFs, which are established due to their safety and efficacy. A focal and a scatter laser may be done in certain indications. In cases of non-resolving hemorrhages or TRD, a vitrectomy is mandated. Iris neovascularization risk factors are often accounted for by FFA, but what are the clinical pointers? First of all, if the patient has had a poor vision, like say in counting fingers, or if there is copious intraretinal blood with large areas of whitening which show ischemia, and large areas of neovascularization which are already there when we see in late cases of vein occlusion, these are the pointers for the patient developing NVG or pointers for iris neovascularization. We also need to differentiate here between collaterals and new vessels per se, so that we can plan the further treatment. The other questions that we need to ask ourselves here are, is any other diagnosis possible here? Like, is this just a vascular occlusion, or does the patient have any immunocompromised status? Can this be a viral retinitis? Does the patient have anemia? Can this be anemic retinopathy? Is there any macular edema? And what is the extent of the retinal ischemia, which prognosticates the condition that the patient has? So it is easier to plan for the treatment and also counsel the patient. Retinal artery occlusions are devastating for the patient and the treating doctor too. There is sudden vision loss. Here also the patient can give a history of a similar episode. We know that the retina is pale, totally pale with a cherry red spot. Although managing the patient as early as possible is our goal, still the prognosis remains guarded, and IOP lowering by various means, either oral acetazolamide or IV mannitol by AC paracentesis, and ocular massage does go some way in helping the patient. We must here rule out hypertension, hyperlipidemia, diabetes, carotid artery diseases, and other cardiovascular diseases. I'm going to amaurosis figures next, because this is the commonest symptom which can progress to the previous two conditions that we discussed. This is often loosely expressed as a transient visual loss, and although we might not see particularly anything in the eye at that moment, there are various conditions which can be found out even when we evaluate a patient with a transient vision loss. Often these are harbingers or pointers to a more serious systemic problem like a cardiovascular event or a stroke. And so a patient's quick workup for these conditions is mandatory. Often monoocular lesions of these kind are either due to ischemia of the retina, the choroid, or the optic nerve. And these areas must be looked at more with a fine-tooth comb to rule any of these cases. If the amaurosis is lateral, then often it is due to cortical lesions, and so cerebral and a cardiovascular workup is mandated. Ocular trauma again can cause a sudden drop in vision due to both anterior and posterior segment complications. Very often, anterior segment findings like hyphema, cataractus lens, or which can impede the view of the retina. So also vitreous hemorrhage. B-scan is mandatory, And we can find retinal tears or detachment and choroidal tears and detachment in these cases, and each condition needs to be treated separately. Vitreous hemorrhage can cause, again, a sudden drop in vision. This can be seen if the patient has diabetes, hypertension, trauma. And here it is important to know the immune status, because when we look for other findings in the eye, whether there's neovascularization, if there is any pain and IOP pointing towards neovascular glaucoma or other causes of glaucoma, and if any part of the retina is visible, we must try to make it a point to rule out if we can see some vasculitis which can be attributed to that vitreous hemorrhage. Retinal detachment, we have already seen about flashes and floaters before. So retinal detachment is another cause for sudden loss of vision. If the detachment is not complete, the patient can give peculiar history, like difficulty in climbing down stairs where the inferior field is involved. There can be a history of trauma. We must note the refractive status of the patient here so that it is easier to plan for the type of surgery and the procedures or maneuvers that need to be done. The important pointer here is the management of the fellow eye. Since one eye has already developed detachment, the other eye also needs to be managed more effectively. Uveitis, both anterior and posterior, can cause, or of course intermediate, can cause sudden loss of vision. Mutton fat KPs point towards cyclitis. We must look for them. We must see if there is vitritis and associated choroiditis, which often needs a thorough systemic and ocular workup to find out the cause and treat it effectively. Blood streak hypopyon points towards a viral etiology. We have already seen a few slides and photos about central serous retinopathy. So also this can cause a sudden loss of vision. This does cause significant and lasting scotomas and is very troubling to the patient. FFA needs to be done here, where we can find if either ink blot, smokestack, or sometimes even a lack of pattern of the leak. Laser photocoagulation to this focal leak is effective, although it does not reduce recurrence. PDT is very effective, since we now know this is a choroidal disease. Eplerenone has been used for a few years now, but a recent study in 2020 has discouraged us from using this owing to lack of effect. AION again causes serious vision impairment in middle-aged patients, especially diabetics. It can be arteritic and non-arteritic, and whether in either of these conditions, fellow eye is often involved very quickly. The prognosis is poor no matter what treatment we do, but still immediate diagnosis and treatment is required. We should expect some curveballs too, like old case whom we have already treated. The scar is stable and suddenly has drop in vision. There can be an active CNVM or even reactivation of the old scar. Old vein occlusion who is already treated can have a new arterial occlusion and the sudden drop in vision. Myopic CNVMs are especially difficult to document since OCT is not confirmatory. OCT doesn't have too many findings. The patient's symptoms of fundus fluorescence angiography will help us diagnose a myopic CNVM. And with recent corona and other viruses looming around us, post-viral neuroretinitis with macular involvement should also be kept in mind so that we do not miss these findings. These are a few things that I've tried to highlight here to avoid repetition throughout the day. Just this photo to help us triage in our mind presence or absence of pain, and is the vision loss transient or persisting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dipti, for this wonderful session. I apologize for the mix-up earlier. I now request our last speaker for the session, Dr. Devesh Kumar, to unmute the mic, turn on the camera, and share the presentation. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank AIOC for providing me this opportunity. So I'll be presenting two cases here. So case one, a 22-year-old male presented with chief complaints of distortion of vision in the left eye for past 2 weeks. He also complained of diminution of vision in the left eye for distance. He did not complain of any ocular pain, redness, or photophobia. There were no complaints in the right eye, and he did not have any known systemic illness. On examination, the visual acuity in the right eye was 6.6 and in the left eye was 6.12, which improved to 6.9 with refractive correction. The pupillary reaction in both the eyes was brisk with no relative afferent pupillary defect. The anterior segment examination was unremarkable. There were no AC or retrolental cells in either of the eyes. The fundus examination showed that the vitreous was clear in the left eye. The optic disc seems to be normal. There is no excavatory abnormality which can be noted in the optic disc. There is no optic disc edema. a shallow neurosensory retinal elevation can be seen at the posterior pole centered at the fovea of roughly 2 disc diameter in diameter, and subtle RPE changes can be noted in the supranasal part of the macula. However, no underlying choroidal pathology can be seen. And also the neurosensory detachment is limited to the macular area, is not connected with the optic nerve head. The peripheral retinal examination of this eye was normal, and the fundus in the other eye was also normal. So we make a clinical diagnosis of acute onset, since it was only 2 weeks, central serous chorioretinopathy. So what to do in such a case when a patient comes to you, a healthy young male or female comes to you with complaints of distortion of vision? You should first confirm whether the distortion is present or not, or whether the patient is perceiving a blurring of vision or splaying of the images as a distortion. Then perform OCT to document and rule out other pathologies. FA and ICG are not required in the acute stage. They can be performed when CNVM is suspected or when focal therapy is planned. And the utmost important is risk factor assessment, that why did this disease occur in this patient. So the Amsler chart in this patient showed distortion of the lines, and there was bending in of the lines as shown by the red circle, suggestive of micropsia. The SDOCT of this patient's left eye showed a neurosensory detachment at the fovea, at the macula, with clear contents. The contents may be hyperreflective also if it's a fibrinous case of CSE, but in this patient it was clear. There was no choroidal neovascular membrane seen, and the neurosensory detachment, as we can see in the OCT, is not extending nasally toward the optic nerve head. It has no connection with the optic nerve head, and prominent choroidal vessels may also be seen beneath the retinal pigment epithelium. So management in such a case should be risk factor modification if there are any, lifestyle modification, but in this patient there were no risk factors and observation was advised. So take home message in this case is CSE is the common retinal pathology that causes distorted vision. An Amsler chart should be done to confirm and document distortion, and OCT should be done to document NSD and PD and rule out other causes of neurosensory detachment at the posterior pole and look for CNVM in chronic cases. Now case 2, a 54-year-old male patient presented with complaints of diminution vision in right eye since 2 days. He also had flashes and floaters in that eye 1 week ago. There were no other ocular complaints in either of the eyes, and he did not have any cystic. The visual acuity in the right eye was 618, which did not improve, and the left eye was 6.9, which improved with pinhole to 6.6. The intraocular pressure was 10 and 14 in both the eyes, in right and left eye respectively. So what to do in such a patient? Take a relevant history, perform a focused slit lamp examination and posterior segment examination. And so in history, the patient had new onset floaters and flashes of light, and the patient did not give any history of trauma. He did not have any history of use of high-powered glasses or any previous retinal treatment. On anterior segment examination, there were retinal pigments present in the anterior vitreous in the right eye, suggestive of tobacco dusting or Scheffer sign. And there was nucleus sclerosis grade 2 cataract in both the eyes. So posterior segment examination, if we see the macular and the posterior pole image, there is a shallow detachment which can be seen involving the fovea, which may be missed if non-mydriatic examination is performed. However, on a dilated fundus examination, we can see there is a quadrantic RD which is involving the supratemporal quadrant. A supratemporal lattice is there with a horseshoe tear at the lateral margin, and there is also a pigmented lattice in the inferonasal periphery. So the diagnosis is clear that it's a supratemporal rhegmatogenous retinal detachment with macula off, and there is a lattice with horseshoe tear at its margin and a pigmented lattice in attached retina infranasally. The left eye examination is also important, and however it did not reveal any treatable retinal lesion. So management wise, one should get an axial length done if myopia is suspected. Supportive treatment should be started in all cases of rhegmatogenous retinal detachment till surgery is performed, including cycloplegics, topical steroids, and advise rest to the patient. Now, urgent referral to a retina specialist is of paramount importance in this case because the fovea is very shallow detached and it's a fresh RD. So take home message in this case is that new onset floaters and flashes, they demand a thorough retinal examination after dilatation. Non-mydriatic examination may miss cases of subclinical RD or RD which are located anterior to the equator or not reaching till the posterior pole. Tobacco dusting, as it has been previously told in the previous talk, that is the Schaeffer sign. It points toward the presence of a retinal break through which the RP is released, and supportive treatment should be started in such cases while awaiting surgery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Devish. Yeah, we have completed the list of talks. I will hand over to the chairpersons to highlight on the important take-home points for the audience, especially from the general ophthalmologist part of it, starting from flashes, floaters. What floaters should warn this ophthalmologist in terms of this is significant, not significant? Dr. Sarita, Dr. Alok, or Dr. Sanjeev, anybody? Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Good morning. So excellent session, sir. Sir. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah. So I'll just summarize one by one the talks. So Dr. Bhushan was the first to spoke on photopsia, and I think that the presentation was complete in itself. And the important thing that he highlighted was the presence of turbid vitreous. If you see flashes, floaters with turbid vitreous, then you should do it. And in any case, you will have to do a thorough peripheral examination. But a turbid vitreous will suggest that there is something which is wrong in the periphery. One thing which I just wanted to highlight was for the general ophthalmologist is YAG capsulotomy. Post YAG capsulotomy, we see a lot of patients coming with retinal detachment. So you need to do, especially if there is no PVD when you do YAG, and post YAG, you need to have these patients under follow-up. The second talk was on central scotoma by Dr. Sunil, and I think he had covered extensively all the causes for central scotomas very nicely. The things that just I wanted to add was that some of these patients will complain, come with complaints of inability to read. So that's one thing which is, even if they don't have vision problem, they just complain of inability to read properly. And I think in Dr. Saurabh in his talk had pointed out on this, that the missing letters sometimes can point to Mactel. And in the talk on distortion, one thing which the general ophthalmologist should do is to get an OCT, especially when they are doing multifocal IOLs, because sometimes you can pick up these subtle ERMs, and that can cause post-op distortion, and that can be menacing for the patient. The talk on sudden diminution of vision by Dr. Dipti was excellent, and I think the take-home message that many of these conditions are reversible if detected early, and some of them can point out to a life-threatening, even a life-threatening systemic disease. So it's very important to do a thorough examination. Dr. Devesh, who spoke on, who gave presented two beautiful cases, one on CSC and the other was retinal detachment. I think on CSC, just one point, history of steroids, very important. Sometimes even the patient, even if they are not using, they can apply steroids to some of their family members, and that can also be a risk factor. I think that's all from my side. Dr. The others can add.
Yeah.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I think Dr. Alok Sen already had explained, summarized all the talk speakers, and this has been an excellent presentation. In fact, a very good presentation for all general ophthalmologists. And that one message I want to just summarize to give that one message, that all the symptoms actually, where sometimes we find out the symptoms, we notice the symptoms and we just ignore it. Like the patient may be just malingrar or something else, patient is just hysterical, or patient, this is not such significant symptom. So all the symptoms, in fact, should be taken very well. And unless we feel like there's no disease, it should not be ignored. So that is very important. Like with this talk, it all came up, like all the things, like even the several drugs, other things, all they may lead to several symptoms. So one should not ignore. That is the most important thing they want to convey. Thank you.
Dr. Sarita, any comments?
I would like to just make one comment. like for a general ophthalmologist, if there are flashes along with floaters, this is very significant. I feel I've seen like only flashes are seen in many patients, but if they're associated with floaters, definitely we do see a break. So one message. Thank you.
And
Just to the speaker.
just one, yeah.
Go ahead, Mahesh.
Flashes at night when they wake up, or that is usually harmless, supposed to be harmless. Many people say when the dim illumination, that is one thing. So you have to listen to the patient very carefully what they are talking about.
In many of these cases, since we are dealing with vision loss, you have to try to differentiate between ocular and possible neurological causes also for these symptoms. In terms of this, there are a lot of non-ophthalmic causes for these symptoms also. How do we go about doing that? And from a clinician's point of view, we're not looking at scans, simple like pupils and all these things. So assessment of all that, no? Any comments on those aspects? Because any decreased vision is important to assess certain things before you dilate the pupils, before we dilate all these things. So we have assessed the vision, and what's the role of pupillary examinations here with this? Dr. Alok?
So very important, sir. Many a times what we see in our clinic is that the patient is already dilated, and you see the patient and you want to know what is the pupillary reaction, which is I think most of the time is missed in a busy general ophthalmologist clinic. So I think the importance of documenting pupillary reaction, whether there is even subtle RAPD, is very important as far as any patient coming with sudden loss of vision or vision loss is concerned. Very
And
important.
simple confrontation test.
Confrontation, yeah.
That is very important. You can call the patient next day to check the pupillary reaction. Nothing lost.
Yeah, this is especially true in patients with optic neuritis, where everything is normal, the nerve is looking healthy. The only clue is on the pupillary reaction. So it's important to document these. How much
sometimes?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Sometimes even in trauma patients, when the pupil is already dilated, the consensual reflex is important to note down, so that we actually look for traumatic optic neuropathies.
How much importance would you give for Amsler's charting in these patients with these kind of symptoms in terms of any central vision distortions, for a general ophthalmologist perspective? Dr. Mittal or Mahesh, you can go ahead.
Amsler grid examination is one thing very important, in fact. And not only that, like what I just discussed about pupillary reaction. In fact, pupillary reaction, like we should actually remember that, in fact, to start with, even just with the torchlight examination, because preliminary examination, there is miss that pupillary subtle changes. And Amsler grid, like it should be a part of your actually OPD paraphernalia, like when we are examining the patient, because certainly we will get certain things. At times we may not have any clinical finding immediately in the fundus examination, but that Amsler grid is very important.
Home Amsler is extremely important, because we should train the patient. Our sisters can train them how to use home Amsler, especially if it is a one-night patient. Nothing to worry. Patient will tell if there is a fresh metamorphosia. If they are both otherwise normal, we have to teach him to look for the home Amsler, especially when we are doing this AMD follow-up and all. Home Amsler is extremely useful.
In this era of teleconsultations, when a lot of people are on teleconsultation, they complain of floaters, flashes. How do you all handle these patients on teleconsultations? Dr. Sarita or Dr. Alok or Dr. Professor? Anything in the history that can warn you? Can you, okay, this patient has to come in, or this patient can be managed over the teleconsultations? Any clues? Ideally not possible, but...
Yeah. I think Dr. Sarita had already answered this. Flashes with floaters must undergo examination, and Dr. Mahesh also said that if someone has splashes in the night, so that has not got much of meaning. So I think it was already answered.
Probably the recent onset of symptoms, floaters, flashes, and all that. I think we are at the end of the session. I'd like to thank all the speakers, all the chairpersons for their contributions. I think we have had a very interesting session. And thank our coordinators, Dr. Preetham, Dr. Saurav, Samruddhi, for helping us organize this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, Nikhil sir, and it's a pleasure to have you after such a long time on these platforms. You're the only person I made Dr. Parthiv call you. Everybody else I called myself. I said, you might not listen to me. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time given, all of you, Professor Mittal, Professor Berry, Dr. Alok. Thank all my speakers. Mahesh, I learned a lot from you today. Definitely.
I would have failed.
I failed.
I would have failed this quiz.
I tried to. I failed.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Chairperson. Thank you, Chairpersons, moderators, and speakers.